Hi guys, this is Mike. In this ZBrush tutorial, I'm going to talk about the advantages of ZBrush. Now the first thing that I want to talk about is Zspheres. Zspheres is a way of making geometry within ZBrush so you can use as your base mesh. A lot of 3D programs don't have the ability to quickly make geometry other than using primitives such as a sphere or cube or cylinders. But the power of ZBrush is one of the advantages is its Z-spheres. So what a Z-sphere is basically when you click and drag within ZBrush canvas, you get this one little sphere that you can start building upon and start making more and more Z-spheres. So for an example, I'll draw out this Z-sphere, press T on the keyboard to allow it to be editable, and so I can add in some more. So what I do is, if I click and drag on the Z-sphere, now I have this other Z-sphere that I can pull up and create more, and you can see how we have all these link spheres in between these two Z-spheres. So I'm going to undo back for a minute, and I want to go to texture. Excuse me, I want to go to transform and then go to activate symmetry in the X. So now when I add in a Z-sphere, you can see there's a little red circle as an indicator that this is mirrored over and it's symmetrical. So if I create another Z-sphere and make sure I'm in draw, I know I can make this exactly in the center of my original Z-sphere. So I'm just going to scale this down a little bit. And say I want to make a character, and I'm just kind of freeform creating here without any real reference. But say I want to, let's see, maybe make sort of a character. Give this thing some legs. Pull this down here a little bit. So you can see you can quickly make sort of a skeleton of your character. And I'm going to make a similar thing here. It's sort of like spider legs here. And you can see how quickly you can kind of start making something very quickly within ZBrush using these Z-spheres. You can just add in these link spheres. You can see in between, you can scale these up, rotate. And then say I want to give this character maybe a body. And I'm going to move up from the top here. Pull this up, and you can scale these if you want. So I can scale this up a little bit. I think what I want to do is move this down a bit. And I just really want to demonstrate this, but just want to kind of give this guy sort of a head here. Add in another Z-sphere. And I think I'm going to scale this one up really big. Whoop. And what I want to do is I want to give this guy sort of a mouth. And I'm going to put eyes on each side of his head. Something like that. So now that you have this sort of this character, and you know you can make any complex creature or character that you want. But the idea here is that you kind of build out these bones, these kind of link spheres, and then what you can do is using adaptive skin right down here in this menu here, and you can do a little preview. You can see how the geometry is starting to look. So it's just a way for you to quickly build out a base mesh in which order to modify. Now you can do this in a few different ways. You can make your adaptive skin. So say I click on here, make adaptive skin, and you can go over here to this little tool palette. Now you can always go back to your original tool where you have your Zspheres, press A, and now you can go back to creating your character, go back to creating your character if you want. But if you want to use this, then you can start using some of the brushes that we have, and I'm going to show you that in the next part. But before I get into that, you can also export this as an OBJ. You can send this into another program where you can retopologize, say in Maya or Cinema 4D or Modo. And then what you can then do is UV, bring it back into ZBrush. Say if you're going to be bringing into a game, sending this out into a game, or you're making it for an animation for visual effects. So the next thing that I want to talk about as the advantage for ZBrush is Dynamesh. Now, when you're creating something and you're moving your object around, you're kind of sculpting out the base mesh of your character or creature or whatever you're modeling, you're going to have a lot of stretching. So I'm going to go to my move tool and I'm just going to scale this up a little bit. And say you're shaping out your model, you're just kind of getting your basic form for what your model is going to look like, and you're kind of just shaping things out. The issue is that if you don't have your geometry exactly the way how you plan the shape and the form out, if you don't plan it out correctly, and you start pulling out and say you're pulling out the shape of your character, what you're going to have is a lot of stretching, elongated polygons, and it really destroys the integrity of your base mesh, of your geometry. So the power of ZBrush, and one of the advantages, is that it has something called Dynamesh. And what that does is, as you're moving around your object, and let me undo for a second, as you're moving around your object and you're pulling things out and you're giving it shape, what you can then do is use Dynamesh in order to recalculate the mesh of your object, so you don't have a lot of stretching. So if I go to wireframe and I go to this wireframe, you can see the base mesh. And let me move in, zoom in a little bit so you can see this mesh a little bit better. So if I'm pulling things out, you can see how this mesh is being stretched. And that just doesn't work very well once you're getting into your geometry and you want it to have this nice detail. You're going to lose this detail in here because there's just isn't enough geometry to support the detail that you're trying to make. So let me undo, and what I want to do is shape out, say, this face a little bit. And I'm going to press S on the keyboard to bring down the draw size. And I'm just kind of moving this around a little bit. Just kind of shaping out. Say I want this to be sort of a mouth. And I want to kind of shape out the face a little bit and just kind of make this sort of creature. So I'm moving things around. I'm kind of stretching things out. So say I want to remesh this using the Dynamesh. So I'm going to go down to a low resolution, say 64. Make sure this is Dynamesh is on. I'm going to keep the blur down, keep projection off. And I'm just going to control click and drag. And you can see how it recalculates this mesh to a lower resolution. Now the reason why I want a lower resolution is when you're working in ZBrush and really any digital modeling environment, you want to start with a low resolution. And then as you shape your model, your character or creature, you then add in resolution as needed. So you can see now that we have this form at a lower resolution, and now we can start shaping out a little bit more of this character. So this is a distinct advantage for ZBrush. And if you're working in this environment, you want to be able to kind of, maybe you want to sketch out a concept and you start, you just start moving things around, start shaping things around. And maybe you have an idea of what you want, but you don't have an exact image or anything like that. And you're just kind of moving around your object. Well, you're going to be stretching out this geometry a little bit as you shape and as you move things around. So as you do that, you just click and drag, control click and drag, and it's going to recalculate that mesh. So you can start moving a lot of stuff around, a lot of geometry around, and then you can quickly recalculate that mesh. So the next thing I want to talk about for ZBrush and its advantages is the wide array and assortment of brushes that we have here in ZBrush. So if you go to your brushes here, you can see this large amount of brushes that are all customizable. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I just want to talk about a few and just kind of give you a broad idea of what we're looking at and the advantages that you will have. If you go into other programs such as Cinema 4D, Maya, or Mudbox, you have a group of very minimalist brushes that you can use to sculpt out your characters and your models. But with ZBrush, you have quite a large array of brushes, not just in this brush palette that we have here, but we also have Lightbox. And if you go into brushes, you have yet more brushes in order to choose from. Ones that usually you don't usually use right at first, but as you start sculpting, you start seeing a lot of all these other brushes hidden away within Lightbox. So you have quite a large array of brushes in which to work with. So I'm just going to kind of start off with some of the basic ones. We've kind of been using the Move brush. Let me turn off Lightbox. And you can kind of use Move to just kind of use some basic overall shaping of your model. But once you start getting into some more higher resolution, and I'm going to go to my polyframe, you can kind of see, and let me zoom in a bit, you can kind of see where I used Dynamesh, added in some more resolution so I can get some more finer details. So let me turn off wireframe. So as we kind of work through, one brush that really works well is the clay buildup. And let me bring down the draw size a bit. And what you'll do is instead of using the Move brush to bring up areas, you'll use the clay buildup to sort of build up that area that you want to give a little bit more shape to. And then you'll just kind of smooth it out into the rest of your model. And so you use this for, like, say, muscles or the surface of like a creature in this case. We'll just kind of give it a little bit of little shape here. And I guess a good way to look at this is maybe move in on to the facial area. You can kind of see, like, I was starting to work on this area for the nose and the nostrils. So you'll kind of like build this up a little bit. And then you just kind of like smooth it out. Let me bring down the intensity. And you just kind of like smooth out a little bit of what you build up. And I'll bring down the draw size for this particular area. And you can kind of like build it up and maybe around the nose or the shape of this creature. Not even sure what this is really, just maybe sort of an insect creature a little bit, but you can kind of get the idea of how this workflow works a little bit as you kind of build up a little bit around areas like bony areas of the face, and you kind of like smooth that back into the model a little bit. And we also have Damien Standard. We can use that to cut in a little bit. And let me undo a little bit and let me bring down the draw size and maybe the focal shift. Kind of play around with this a little bit. And you can use this to sort of carve in areas. And then kind of smooth that out if you need to. So there's all kinds of different tools that you can use. Maybe to add in some wrinkles. And maybe I don't like this detail that I made, so I'll bring up my draw size a little bit, smooth this out. Bring my draw size back down and just sort of carve away a little bit around my character's mouth. Maybe areas where there's going to be some smooth that out a little bit. Maybe areas where there's going to be a lot of folding, like in the corners of the mouth. You'll kind of add in some wrinkles and some lines. Kind of give it some overlapping, crisscrossing lines a little bit, and that kind of gives it where there's going to be folds of the flesh, and that kind of gives it a little bit more detail. So obviously there's many uses for this brush. You can kind of give it a little bit of detail where it kind of gives it a little bit of sort of like scars or textures and details. And just kind of as it's flowing away from flowing with or with the muscles, and you kind of smooth that out if you need to. And I'm using a Wacom tablet, so there's pressure sensitivity as you're using this brush, so you can kind of see how much fun this can be once you start getting into some certain areas of this character, or as you're getting into the sculpting process. And if you don't like something, you just kind of smooth it out very quickly. So at this point, we're at a process where we're adding in more and more resolution, and we're kind of not into the area of shaping as much. What we're really doing now is adding in some fine details. So this is where a lot of these brushes can come in handy. And I know I only looked at a few, but you can see a lot of the different areas that you can use. A lot of these different brushes will give you the ability to add in detail that you probably wouldn't be able to do with sort of a minimalist tool set that you might find in other programs. So you can add in, pinching effects. You can add in all kinds of different folds and all kinds of different textures as well. And Also, keep in mind you have alphas that you'll use for different areas. So say for an example, if I just stick with the clay buildup, you have different alphas that you can use to affect how this brush will look and how it will work on your mesh. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can affect even just one brush. So you have all these different alphas, you have the way the stroke works, you have drag rectangle, so you can drag in, say for an example, drag in this, and I have the intensity kind of low, so let me bring this up so you can, just so you can see it a little bit better. But you can kind of drag in this effect, and you can do this in other programs as well. It's just trying to illustrate how well you can change each brush as you work with it. So that's one other advantage, is just the wide assortment of brushes and the customization of each brush to give you a really professional look for whatever result you're trying to work with. One of the other advantages that Zbrush has is the use of Polypaint. Now what Polypaint is the ability to paint on your model, but without having to go through the process of UVs. So the way Polypaint works is basically just painting and texturing your model, but instead of using UVs for the information, it uses the vertices and polygons. So if you have, based on that, if you have a low amount of polygons, you're going to have a low amount of resolution on your model. So it's the same thing with sculpting. You want to use as much resolution, high resolution as you can. And I'll go to my polyframe mode, and you can see the amount of density of this mesh. So the more dense, the more resolution that you have, the more detail you'll be able to use with your Polypaint. So what you can then do is just start painting on your model and texturing. Now, another advantage within this advantage of Polypaint is being able to paint and sculpt at the same time. So right now I just have my paint set to RGB, but I can also have it set to add as well. So not only am I painting, I'm also sculpting at the same time. So this gives you an advantage of being able to add in details around your model and paint at the same time, instead of having to sculpt and then paint in that area. So this works really well for, like, say you're adding in some details of your model, and you want to add in, say, like a scar or a burn or some type of detail, where raised detail on the surface of your object that also affects the color, like a bruise or something like that, and that will really show that detail through, as opposed to just having the sculpture, or having the surface changed. So if you can have that color as well, that will be a distinct advantage. So I'm going to turn off Z add, but as you can see, you can add in color into your character or model, whatever you're painting, without having to go through that process of UVs. Now you can still bake out your UVs. You can still make UVs and then bring your maps into another program, say Maya or Cinema 4D, and then go from there for your rendering. Now, ZBrush does have rendering abilities, but if you want to get into something a little bit more detailed, you would bring it into another program. So you can absolutely use your UVs and bring that in. And like I said before, you can use this as a process where you don't have to just use ZBrush. You can then model your, you can make your model in ZBrush using Zspheres, and then bring it into another program, maybe do the UVs for that model, and then bring it back into ZBrush for more sculpting and painting. So there's some very distinct advantages that you don't get in other programs that you can get within ZBrush. So it's a very good program for sculpting, for concepting, and as well as making a finished product. And if you do bring UVs in from another program, you can then bake out these maps and then bring that into another program to put that on top of your low polygon mesh, but still retain your high detail and all the details that you made within ZBrush. I put a link in the description to download project files. You can also go to astronomic3d.com to download project files from this tutorial and all the tutorials that I've made so far. Thanks for watching.